On July 2nd, 1951, at about 8 a.m. in St. Petersburg, Florida, Mrs. Reeser's landlady came to give a Mrs. Mary Reeser a telegram and some coffee when she found that the metal doorknob was hot to the touch. After enlisting the help of some carpenters working nearby, she eventually forced the door open. Inside, they found the cremated remains of Mrs. Reeser. Most of her body was in ashes, the only surviving parts being her backbone and left foot, still with a slipper on it. Her skull was also found, shrunken to the size of a teacup, with all facial features removed. After calling the police, an investigation was launched by the local police chief, Junior Reichart. The investigation found that, although Reeser's body was totally cremated, the rest of the room was largely unaffected. Only a few appliances had been melted and made soft due to the heat. A socket had also melted, stopping the clock at 2:26 a.m. The police were baffled that a fire that caused so much damage to Mrs. Reeser could leave the rest of the house, indeed much of the room, intact. During the investigation, Reichart sent FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to take several items from the crime scene, including glass fragments found in the ashes, small charred pieces of teeth, some carpet, and the slipper. In response, Hoover sent a team of FBI investigators and physical anthropologists to Wilton Krogman, as well as notifying President Harry S. Truman. After weeks of investigation, the FBI declared that Reeser had died due to the wick effect. As a known user of sleeping pills, they concluded that she had fallen asleep while smoking and set fire to her nightgown. They reasoned that the human body had enough fat and other inflammable substances for the body to set alight, like a candle. This would therefore allow large amounts of destruction. However, both Reichart and Krogman disagreed on the conclusion made by the FBI. Krogman remarked that, "I find it hard to believe that a human body, once ignited, will literally consume itself, burn itself out, as does a candle wick, guttering in the last residual pool of melted wax." Just what did happen on the night of July 1st, 1951, in St. Petersburg, Florida? We may never know, though this case still haunts me. And on the shrunken skull, he wrote, "The head is not left complete in ordinary burning cases. Certainly it does not shrivel or symmetrically reduce to a smaller size. In presence of heat sufficient to destroy soft tissues, the skull would literally explode in many pieces. I have never known any exception to this rule." After finally concluding that, "I cannot conceive of such complete cremation without more burning of the apartment itself. In fact, the apartment and everything in it should have been consumed. I regard it as the most amazing thing I have ever seen. As I review it, the short hairs on my neck bristle with vague fear. Were I living in the Middle Ages, I'd muster something about black magic." Krogman then put forward the idea that Reeser was murdered with crematorium equipment, but with no explanation for the melted appliances. We may never know who or what caused Mary Reeser to ignite in her armchair on July 2nd, 1951 at 2:26 a.m. Whether you believe in the paranormal or spontaneous human combustion, the case does tell us this: perhaps truth can be stranger than fiction. The following is transcribed directly from documents found in an abandoned German test lab by American soldiers during the aftermath of World War II, roughly translated into English. Audio tape. Testing is to begin tomorrow. The team does not know what to expect. Our mission is to take new research and turn it into a weapon for the war front. It has recently been discovered that the brain releases a previously unknown chemical when feeling fear. For obvious reasons, this test could be extremely dangerous. 2 test subjects have been selected, and from what we were told, they were sentenced to death, but are going to instead be used as subjects in this experiment. Subjects are given a table with 2 chairs, a cot with a mattress, a stocked bookcase, a notebook and pen, and a bathroom area consisting of a toilet, a sink, and a mirror. Food and water are given through a small, sealable opening. I have nothing more to report at this time. Written document. Test subject A and B are being given the chemical in a small dose, mixed with water. Test Subject A has consumed the water and has shown no visible changes in mood or behavior. Test Subject B has refused to drink the water. He has been forcefully given the same dosage, but by direct injection. He gave some resistance, but was easily controlled and injected. Shortly afterward, he seemed nervous, almost paranoid, and jumped whenever he heard a sudden noise. Subjects have been told to try and remain active, or sleep, not just idle. Written document. It took time, but we have developed a gas-based version of the chemical. If shown effective on subjects, this could become a valuable weapon. Dosage has been increased slightly. Neither subjects were aware that the chemical was being let into the room. After a few minutes, Subject A stopped reading and began to look around the room cautiously. After an estimated hour, he began to read again. Subject B immediately responded. He opened the notebook for the first time and wrote, "What is going on? Stop whispering to me. I do not want you near me," onto a piece of paper, ripped it out of the notebook and slipped it under the doorway. No reply was given. Written. We are going to observe the effects of long-term, low amounts of the gas on Subject A, and we are going to observe the effects of a short, high-amount period of gas on Subject B. The results are shocking to say the least. Subject A progressively became more unstable. He stopped reading, would not eat, and avoided the mirror at all costs. He suddenly became very aggressive and threw a heavy book at the mirror with surprising force, shattering it. Subject B's reaction was more curious. He began staring at the second chair, but he wasn't looking at the chair. He was looking as if he was making eye contact with someone sitting in the chair. Something seems amiss, but we are definitely getting results. The Führer will be pleased. Vocal recording. The voices sound distressed. We didn't want this. What did we do to deserve God's vengeance such as this? Subject B escaped from his cell. The chair he was staring at was thrown across the room, straight into the viewing glass, instantly shattering it. It was 5 inches thick, reinforced. He didn't even touch the chair. He has escaped out of the hole made by the impact. A very loud scream drowns out anything being said. Help me! Help me! He's ripping! A loud crunch is audible. The vents are leaking the gas into the rest of the facility. The power has gone offline, and he has killed off all the guards. Oh my lord. Oh no. No, 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 please! There is a loud, beastly roar, and sounds of struggle. The rest of the tape is silent. One final note was found. It seemed to be hastily written and barely legible. They are dead, every one of them. I hear him in the walls. I hear him whispering to me. Yes, yes, please come and take me away. I want no more of the... And the note ends there. The rest too soaked in blood to read. On April 23, 1944, Allied soldiers found an abandoned German laboratory, with its only door sealed shut. Using explosive charges, they forcefully entered the laboratory, wondering what was so important that the Germans had to lock it away. They found 13 bodies, 12 of which had matching lab coats on, mangled to pieces, and in one case, ripped straight in half. The 13th body had no clothing and no head. A larger-scale investigation was launched later by the Germans as to determine what happened, but was cancelled after many German soldiers absolutely refused to return to the laboratory, even if threatened with their lives. To this day, nobody knows what happened to B, but he is presumed to be dead. Atop the salt-encrusted docks and piers of Seattle squats an ugly clapboard shack. Its windows smeared with grime, and the walls draped in fishing nets. The oil slick. An aptly named bar riddled with age and barnacles, but a sanctuary to the swarm of deckhands and sailors that spend their days scurrying across the rotting hulls of ships, and their nights slipping into a drunken stupor. It's a rough bar, where a careless comment will earn you a punch to the face and a long fall into the grimy waters below. On any given night, one can find an aged Chinese sailor curled up against the bar. A broad-shouldered old salt with a bulging gut and an empty stare pasted across his wide face. His name is Hao Ming, but to the regular floatsmen of the pub, he's known as the Man of the 28 Dragons. 28 scaly tattooed reptiles twine sinuously across his arm and legs, and twist menacingly across the bunched muscles on his back. Howe claims each dragon represents a crucial part of his life. Stories transformed into ink. Buy him a drink and he'll be happy to share the thrilling tales behind each one, carefully describing how the dragon's colors represent his joy, terror, love, loss, and death. Visit him 28 nights and buy him 28 drinks, and the powerful stories of his life will weave and merge before your eyes, until they resolve into the aging man drinking next to you. And then, satisfied, you have exhausted his treasury of adventures, you'll excuse yourself and float out into the night. The light and noise of the oil slick bobbing across the dark waves. And the man of the 28 dragons will finish his drink and clutch his faded shirt to his chest. His last secret. His hidden dragon safe. He swore long ago to never reveal the tattoo or the story to any living soul, and he never has, except once. Once on a stormy night, when the rain spattered like ink across the grimy windows and the wind howled through the cracked wood, when he told the story to me. It began as an entertaining night, as I leaned on the counter sipping my poison and watching Ming pummel the face of some quartersman who had drunkenly slurred a remark pertaining to damn slant eyes. From across the bar, stumbling backwards, the sailor grabbed at Ming's shirt, tearing the front and momentarily revealing Ming's chest. With a roar, Ming caught him under the chin, and the drunkard slumped to the floor. Game over. Ming pulled his shirt back across his shoulders and walked back to his drink, and the noise in the bar returned to normal, everyone laughing and continuing their private banter. I was the only one who noticed it. The black serpent scrawled over his heart, a Chinese dragon, its broad tail curling in loops behind it, long whiskers sprouting from its face like tangles of wet hair. Arming myself with the twin barrels of guile and alcohol, I took the seat next to him and offered him several slugs of amber liquid. He recognized me as one of the regulars, and knowingly accepted my offer. "Okay, friend," he winked, holding out his arms. "What story would you want to hear tonight?" I pointed my fingers at his chest, indicating the hidden serpent curled around his heart. His smile vanished in a flash. With an inscrutable gaze, he stared into my eyes. His heavy lips curled down into a frown, almost a grimace. "No good story," he grunted. "Forget you seen it, okay?" I was tempted to give up, but noticed he was rocking slightly in his chair. Seizing my chance, I clapped him on the shoulder, telling him not to worry about it, and ordering him several more drinks in the spirit of goodwill. 2 hours and a dozen drinks later, he broke. He began to sob quietly into his cup, telling me he was sorry, that he wanted to tell me his story but swore he wouldn't. With the precision of a surgeon, I knifed across his slurred words and stabbed into his psyche, prodding and poking until he dissolved completely. Closing his eyes, he began the story of the Black Dragon. I share it with you here. The old clipper threaded its way through the currents of the South China Sea. With a hole filled with rice, she was bound on a 3-week trip to Sydney. Ming, the lines of age not yet etched so deeply into his face, was a simple deckhand on the rusted, peeling bucket. The days rolled into nights as Ming performed his duties, his mind locked on their destination. The poor condition of the ship meant it needed a long overhaul and dry dock when it reached port, granting the crew a long shore leave. The men joked every night around the dim steel cabin about the things they would drink, the places they would go, the women they would meet. But on the 10th day of voyage, fate rose its middle finger against the ship and Ming's life. As the morning wore on, a steady breeze from the north quickly built into a typhoon. Waves pounded against and over the ship as the stinging wind tore across the bow. For the next 30 minutes, Ming and the crew struggled against the howling chaos, shifting ballast and pumping the holds. Each man put every ounce of strength into saving the clipper, and ultimately his own life. 2 of the men were torn from the deck and swallowed by the storm. And at long last, there was nothing left to do but sit in the dark cabin and beg Poseidon for mercy. The crew awoke to a cloudless sunrise, the sea once again tranquil and flat. Walking outside, they surveyed the damage. The rudder had been torn free and the engine blocks destroyed. The ship was adrift. The cargo hold had been flooded. The cargo was lost. Even worse, the crashing waves had reached over the boat and sheared off the communication tower. Without radio or navigation, low on food and fresh water, the crippled ship drifted helplessly across the blue expanse. Ming lay prostrated on the metal deck, feeling the sun beat savagely against his body. 3 nights ago, the food supplies had run out, and the water was put on ration. A deckhand had died of an infected wound. Another injured man had escaped slow, lingering death by hanging himself. Morale was nil. Even the captain had begun to eye the end of his own pistol. The next night, a light appeared on the horizon. "Rescue!" cried the men to one another. They quickly built and lit a signal fire on deck and waved flashlights into the dark, yelling and screaming out to their saviors. Their efforts were successful. The bright light was moving closer. At this point in the story, Ming dropped his voice into a low whisper. The crew's elation only rose as the ship drew near. Soon, a second light could be discerned under the first. The glow from the ship lit up the dark outlines of the men on the deck. They laughed and shouted, "Hello," across the water, but not Ming. Backing away from the light, Ming stumbled down the deck until he reached the cabin. Peering out of a metal pothole, he watched the men slowly realize what he had noticed first. There weren't 2 lights. There was 1 light, reflecting off the undisturbed surface of the water. Above, floating higher over the waves, the ship glided into view. A dull silver dome, hundreds of meters across, eclipsed the stars as it bore down upon the boat, its underside blazing with the inferno of the sun. A fire of light climbed up the sides of the hull and spilled across the deck, enveloping the crew. Heart hammering, Ming collapsed below the porthole. Outside, he hears the surprised cries of men rising above the crackling of luminous air. A pistol shot rings out, and another. Ming flees across the cabin. Spotting a metal locker, he ducks inside, pulling the door shut. More shots. Then the cries of the men morph into screams and shrieks. Crouched over, Ming peers through a gap along the floor of the locker. Suddenly, the screams stop in mid-breath. A spear of light smashes into the boat, the steel hull groaning and twisting. The inferno spreads across the length of the boat, penetrating into the cabin. The light pounces from the gap into Ming's eyes. With a yelp, he falls back. The blaze vanishes. Silence shrouds the ship. Ears ringing and eyes burning, Ming's head reels. He crouches down to peer through the crack again, and nothing. Minutes pass. With short breaths, he slowly reaches up to the latch, but as vision swims back into his clouded eyes and the ringing in his head subsides, he freezes. A soft noise brushes against the cloud of silence. Pit-pat. Half deafened by the hammering of his heart, Ming listens to the stillness outside. Pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. He leans back down to the slit and peers across the cabin, blinking the darkness out of his eyes. Pit-pat, pit-pat. The gentle disturbance growing louder. Pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. Struggling to see what lies beyond the upper edge of his vision, he lays his head flat against the metal floor. A long, black tendril drips down from the darkness above. Pat. Ming nearly cries out, but swallows it before it escapes his lips. Pit. Wide-eyed, he gazes as the thin legs of some unknown creature gently slap against the floor. Pat. Cylindrical, an inch wide. The legs end in a knobby stub that flattens as it hits the metal. Pit. The legs stalk back and forth in front of the locker, with gentle rustling of disturbed leaves. Pat. Pit. Pat. Pit. Pat. The feet patter as the creature slowly walks the length of the cabin. Pit. Pat. The tendrils pause in front of the locker. Frozen in fear, Ming watches as they delicately lumber closer. Silence. With a softer sound than before, like the brushing aside of a curtain, unseen arms explore the door of the locker. Prodding, searching. A sharp screech of metal and the latch begins to rattle. As the bolt slides open, Ming clamps his eyes shut. A sudden brilliance of light flows in from the gap. A sudden pitter and the latch falls down. Soft footsteps retreating from the cabin. The light disappears. Once again, Ming is left in blackness. The next morning he slowly exits the locker and wanders onto the deck. The boat is devoid of life. The deck and cabin are seared glossy black. A wide hole melted through the steel yawns down into the hull below. Quickly, Ming grabs the remaining fresh water and stores them onto the ship's lifeboat, along with the scorched pistol he finds near the railing. With starvation a certainty, he casts away from the clipper, rowing endlessly until its dark shape disappears over the horizon. The next day he's discovered and rescued by an Australian freighter. He rages deliriously of floating lights, thin tendrils of legs that slap, and soft rustling in the night. A week later he explains to an official inquiry that the ship's fuel tanks exploded and sunk with all hands but himself. The clipper is never found, and the public's interests fade. Ming moves on with his life. As he finishes his story, he opens his eyes. I'm astonished, not to mention doubtful, at his vivid account. Still, I can't figure out why he has kept such an incredible tale silent for so long. I ask. He turns towards me, tears rolling down from the wrinkled corners of his eyes. I shouldn't have told you the story, he mumbles. I no tell story, and people stay happy. Annoyed, I grabbed my hat and rise to leave. Suddenly he grabs my coat in both hands and pulls me towards his face. The sounds, he cries. I hear them before, I hear them after. My whole life I hear them, but not see them. Now I know what stalks in the night outside my window. He waves a finger in my face. You hear them too, but you not know what they are. I know. They following you too. Pit pat, behind you in the shadows. Anguished, he screams. Spit and tears flying off his face. Always, they are watching you from the darkness.